Moral high ground or self-interest? That is today's topical Talkology talk. Welcome to this week's episode. Hello, Theo.
Hello, Andy. How are you?
I'm great. Yourself?
Very good. A beautiful sunny afternoon. We're looking out over Hanger Green Park.
Yes, it is very nice. Let's get on with the topical talk. I'm anxious to get on with this one actually because I think it's going to be quite interesting. So, what do you think? Do we live on the moral high ground because society's attempting to teach us or conditioning us to live on the moral high ground? But at what point does that become self-interest, or does it become self-interest?
Okay. Well, all you have to do is think about what happens when you have anarchy, and play stories like Lord of the Flies. Mm-hmm. So it is all self-interest, survival instinct. There is no moral high ground unless it's within your vested interest to behave in a moral fashion.
Right. Okay. So
on top of that, we may have evolved over time because obviously we've had to have a certain amount of success living together, and we may have evolved also to naturally believe or tend to believe certain things.
It's one of the things that why we actually, you talk about state and religion, and the two should be separate. But ultimately, we've discussed this in the past. These are a state of rules to actually keep us morally in line, so we don't have things like anarchy. That we are all on the same page. That our values are aligned, and that's what. In terms of diversity, there's not a big problem with diversity, but the problem with diversity comes when there's a diversity of values, and when each country has their own sets of values, their own sets of rules, and their own sets of things that everybody adheres to, then you've got far more harmony. So, of course, that is in the self-interest of a whole community of people, the whole group of people. However, as soon as the values start to contradict what other people are doing, which is what's actually currently happening in the current modern era, we are getting far more problems. We're getting more terrorism, we're getting more riots, we're getting more things like that, which is happening all around the world.
That's right, and of course materialism is another example. Materialism is the ultimate of self-interest, and it's also, why do I say ultimate? Because it's also the most useless form of self-interest, because it's about acquiring illusionary needs. Because we're all hardwired to want to acquire survival needs, but we haven't evolved in the last few thousand years. We're still cavemen, and because now there aren't real survival needs, because most of us have them, then we don't know what to do with our primitive arousal, and what we do is we seek surrogate, delusional survival needs.
I need the moment. I need one of the needs right now is, in effect, with a lot of people, is money, because money is what determines whether you are going to have a roof over your head, particularly in the UK.
No, but that's the basic. We live our lives on a treadmill of instant gratification, chasing illusionary needs. Whether it's the bigger handbag, the hairdo, the bigger house, the bigger job, the faster car. All these are illusionary needs.
I haven't disputed that, but what I'm saying is, in terms of the security that people want, in terms of food on the table, in terms of shelter, in terms of those sort of things, money is obviously an underlying factor in the whole thing, the whole economic thing. This is why we get what's called economic migrants, isn't it? So they can actually have a better life, so they can actually have a roof over their head, so they can actually have food on the table.
You know what happens to economic migrants, though?
Sorry?
Well, you know what happens with economic migrants, a lot of them. If you notice what they do is, when often, not always, but a large proportion, when they retire, they go back to their homelands.
Of course.
And why? Because ultimately there is nothing like family. Mm-hmm. And so again, these people don't quite understand. Everyone's brainwashed with the idea that you have to have the utmost amount of material goods and sense of achievement in your career, without understanding, without society concentrating and honouring the fact that it's family and community that is more important. And until we hit that nail on the head and we learn to fix it, then we'll end up going down the plug hole.
Yeah, we are going down the plug hole. I mean, we've talked about this in recent weeks, particularly places like the UK and the States and things like that. I mean,
who's going to save us, by the way? So, You know who's going to save us?
Who?
According to the Swedish foreign minister.
Please don't tell me a dictator.
No, the Muslims.
All right, they're going to save us.
Yep.
According to who?
The Muslim, according to the Swedish foreign minister, because he just made the very genuine observation, which you've made yourself, that there are hordes and hordes of them coming over, and effectively imposing their own religion on everything around them, and certainly not assimilating and taking on any
of the Swedish culture,
or we're talking broad brushstrokes here.
In fact, there was actually an advert which I saw on YouTube where actually the Swedes are actually were actually I think it was by their government, where the Swedes were actually being sold that they should actually be learning to conform to the others.
I know, how idiotic is that? How incompetent in terms of understanding what is good for a country.
But there's constant rioting in Sweden. I mean, I remember.
Well, that's why
Donald Trump, when he actually said there was a problem in Sweden, and he mentioned it in the speech, and the whole media latched onto it. Goes, there's no problem, and the Swedes said there's no problem in Sweden. But there's a whole different story going on.
But the rioting there is much, much more serious than you think. And what I mean by that is that the connotations of it are much more serious, because there was a study done, I think it was back in 2012, 2013, that looked at the effects of a serious infectious agent, the threat of that on a community. And what they discovered is that it causes autocracy. It causes an authoritarian regime from the ground up, not the top down. It's not imposed. People they consolidate and they become very intolerant of outsiders, and they then extended that, and essentially it's famine will do the same thing. People start rejecting outsiders and bonding together. A slow change, however, doesn't cause that. They said that perhaps war wasn't one of the outcomes, but because the communities they studied were quite small, so small communities don't tend to go to war because they'll know they'll be thrashed. But what's happening is if the Swedes are feeling seriously threatened, they are rising up, and they will become increasingly right-wing, i.e. autocratic, because they do not want foreigners who do not assimilate.
But that's what's happening right now. It happened in the Italian election. More right. There was a more leaning towards a right wing. Merkel. What's her name?
Angela Merkel.
Angela Merkel. She's lost a lot of the power she actually once had.
She did start a new role in office again, didn't she? Her new term.
Yeah, but again, she doesn't have that same level of influence that she actually had before. So there's a lot more actually far right wings in there, and that shouldn't really be happening in the world of politics. There shouldn't be extremes from either side.
If you walk
Austria
through,
as well is another one.
Absolutely.
And they're all looking to put controls on immigration. Look, I haven't got a problem with Muslims. I think a majority of Muslims are fairly.
But do you want to be the ethnic minority amongst Muslims in London? Do you want to be in your own country?
But no, I don't think it should be. Well, it's not a Muslim country anyway. But
do you want to be walking through the streets of parts of London and realise that you are massively in the minority?
That's a very good question.
With people who don't even speak English around you.
Well, the thing is I don't particularly. I think it's appropriate in London. I mean, if I went, look, I've been to Dubai, and I actually respect their culture and I respect their views,
because that's
and I behaved accordingly. You know, and I think
because they insist you do. You get in trouble if you don't.
You're jumping in a little too much there, Theo. All right, we are. I believe when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. And the thing is, people talk about, and this is where I struggle with the liberals. They think everyone should be the same. This is you call them identitists, didn't you? Everyone should be the same. And the problem is that every single culture has its own little thing. The world was big enough to accommodate every single culture, every single religion, every single set of values. Now, all of a sudden, if you take somewhere like the UK, which is quite a small island, now you've got so many contained in a small space. They're tripping up over each other. They're not allowed to create their own space. And like animals, we are, people are territorial. I'm assuming we're probably hardwired to be territorial. You see, you can't actually have an animal going into another animal's terrain, because there will be conflict. There'll be a fight.
Okay, I mean, I see what you mean by territorial. But what as far as humans are concerned, what it is not liking those who are dissimilar to us. We can't help it. We are programmed, we're hardwired to either simply not respond or actively reject those who are dissimilar to us. And in fact, they've done studies. They've measured the activity of mirror neurons in the brain. The mirror neurons are effectively our social neurons. And they've shown a white person, another white person doing tasks, and their mirror neurons far away quite happily. But when they watch a non-white person doing tasks, their mirror neurons are either completely silent or much less busy.
But is it just white person though? I mean, because let me ask you this. I mean, if you actually look at America before the settlers came in, all right, you had the Indian tribes actually fight each other over land. So things aren't very different then to what they are now. They took each other's land off each other. You had tribes in Africa who took land off each other. It hasn't really happened. It's happening now, just in a more cultured way, I suppose. So,
but the rules of human behaviour remain exactly the same.
That's correct.
So humans are not capable of making their own decisions. We discussed that last week, because their opinions are too malleable to change. Humans need parenting, or shall we say leadership. Now, as we also said, one of the basic rules in forensic psychology is the main predictor of crime is opportunity. In other words, everything needs regulation. The reason we got the biggest disasters we've ever had is because of lack of regulation. Our credit crunch came because the main piece of legislation that kept the financial institutions together, the Glass-Steagall Act, was repealed in the mid-90s. And also, if we then look at democracy is exactly that. The theory of democracy is it's all about auto-regulation, self-regulation. But any psychologist worth their salt will tell you that's not possible. People cannot self-regulate. And what humans have done ever since they've evolved into becoming humans is they've tried to understand themselves. And they've tried to, in other words, understand human behaviour, understand why they all do what they do. And that is the origin of myths and mythology, because some of these are very, very ancient, and a lot of them focus on various dilemmas that people face, or various temptations and so on. And of course, many of the stories in the Bible are actually ancient Mesopotamian myths again, which have just been incorporated into the Bible. And indeed, the Ten Commandments was actually Moses, who'd been in the desert for 40 years.
A set of rules.
Well, a set of rules. What he did is, because he was their king, their boss, he effectively had to legislate every single day, countless times a day. And after a certain number of years, he figured out the common denominators of the most basic rules that would make their society function in the most peaceful manner possible. And he came up with the Ten Commandments. And Muslims do very similar things. And anywhere you go where there is some kind of history to a society, there will be some method of distilling out the key things that will make them function, and that is by how they live. And that's the origin of most religions.
Go on. Oh, you start. Oh, sorry.
You pause because I've hogged it too long.
You're some airspace now, are you? Yeah. Excellent. So, because the thing is, one of the things I'd like to know is, you've got so many. Because earlier you talked about the legal. I can't remember what you said now. It was so long ago, but a lot of people saying, here's a set of rules, this is what we follow. But so if you've got the likes of Donald Trump, admittedly he's not articulating it particularly well. The complaint talks about, actually I'm anti-immigrant, I'm anti-illegal immigrants, and a lot of people who actually say illegal immigration, but yet a lot of the liberals will then brand you a racist because of that.
So are you saying what makes people follow rules?
What makes people everyone's going to break rules. I think you've just got to evaluate evaluate the consequences up front as to...
Okay, and what do you mean by consequences? You mean bad things?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
So the thing is, I mean, I think if you actually follow the rules, all you're doing is conforming to a mediocre set of standards that the market